Okay, the date is the 25th of March 2026. My name is Phil Hindmarsh, and can you tell me your name, please?
My name is Anthony Brooks.
And could you give me the spelling, please?
Anthony, Anthony, and then Brooks is Brooks.
Thank you. And have you gone by any previous names?
No, no.
Okay, this interview is being recorded in Hanwell in West London as part of the Border Crossings 30th anniversary project. Can you tell me where you were born and the year of birth, please?
I was born in Oxford, England, in 1963.
Okay, brilliant. And can you start off by telling me a bit about your background?
So I am retired now. I retired a couple of years ago. But before that, for about 35 years, something like that, I was a lawyer, a solicitor, and I worked in-house principally for professional bodies based in London, England. I was born in Oxford, educated there, went to university there. My field of study as an undergraduate at university was the classics, Latin, Greek, ancient history, and then after that I qualified. I did a transitional qualification to go into law, and I became a lawyer, which is what I practiced as all my professional life till I retired.
Yeah. I did classical civilizations and history,
Right,
which I really enjoyed. And we did the Richmond Latimer translations
right,
of the Iliad and the Odyssey, which I
yeah.
really enjoyed. Sorry. Okay, great. And can you tell me how you came to work with Border Crossings?
So I'd known Michael Walling, the artistic director of Border Crossings. I'd known him really since university, but we hadn't really kept in touch. And then we sort of got back in touch. I think it was around about 2015, something like that. And as I was talking to him, he explained about Border Crossings, the company he worked for, and that's really how I first had contact with Border Crossings. He invited me to a performance of this play called This Flesh Is Mine, which I went to see in November 2016 and was quite bowled over by it. It was an excellent production. And then a couple of years later, when the opportunity to become a trustee came up, they were looking for a trustee who had, if you like, covered the legal issues of the company. I jumped at it and applied for that role and got it, and that began my deep association with Border Crossings for the next 6 years.
Excellent. Okay, can we talk a bit about the projects that you worked on and your involvement, in particular your legal role and legal advice for the company and its charitable status?
Yeah, so I mean, I was a trustee for 6 years from 2019 to 2025, and I was, as it were, the legal trustee, whose role was to be, if you like, a legal voice on the more legal issues that come up, more legal and charitable law issues that come up for the company. And so typically that would involve being the legal voice at the trustee board meetings on the legal dimensions of issues. And occasionally there'd be specific legal problems, if you like, that required a bit more detailed attention to it, and then I would work with Michael Walling or others on the board to resolve those legal issues. So that's how it really worked. And so, for example, if there were problems, particular, I don't know, contractual problems or whatever, I would look in more detail in those, or sometimes intellectual property issues came up. And more generally, it's around making sure, if you like, that what the board is doing, what the company is doing, stays within the general parameters of the law and specifically the constraints of charity law. So it was a very interesting role, the input I gave to the company was principally on that. I wasn't directly involved in the artistic productions. There were others who were more directly involved in that. I was really just being a lawyer on the board.
Okay. I've got down that that there were some projects that you did have some involvement with. I was wondering if we could go through those and if you have any recollections of anything that, for example, Mouth of the Gods or...
Yeah, so that was really the last production that took place when I was on the board, and really that was a project that was, the board had been covering its development phase and giving views on different aspects of it, practical side of it as well as the artistic side, and it culminated, I think it was February 2025 when I went to see the production at Hoxton Hall, and again that was I think it illustrated to me why I have been so proud, or I was so proud to be associated with Border Crossings, because the production was absolutely magnificent. It was an opera theatre production. It was looking at the tensions between the indigenous cultures of Peru, Latin America, at the time of just after the Spanish conquest back in the 1550s, that sort of era. And it was using a pretty original source material from the actual indigenous peoples themselves. And it was, I suppose, doing what I think the core mission of Border Crossings has been, which is to give voice to the dispossessed, the marginalised peoples of the world, in particular indigenous people who've experienced, for example, colonialism, colonial violence, and so on. And I came away from that, and I think most people did, with a different perspective on what happened then, and a perspective that isn't normally given, and it was eye-opening. It was, above all, an extremely moving artistic experience, and so in that sense, it's really the sort of core of what Border Crossings is about to me.
That's really good. I've got down another one, Remembrances.
Yeah, Remembrances was an interesting project. Again, the role was on the board. It was watching the development of the project, the practicalities, as well as the artistic direction. As you're watching the development, as you're developing a project, there's very much a lot of practical details. Where is it going to be performed? Aspects of that, as well as the sort of the artistic aim of it. And that was a project which, again, took very careful planning and was quite a while in the development. And it was, again, a pretty good project that I was proud to have, in as my role as a trustee on the board, to have been allied with.
Another issue that might be might have been difficult, the pandemic.
Yeah, so with the pandemic, I mean, the pandemic started very suddenly for everyone, completely unexpectedly. The month before the lockdown, I there'd been the production of one of the excellent productions that I remember from my time at Border Crossings, The Great Experiment, which was a play about the experience of indentured servitude among the Mauritians, the Indian peoples who were, as it were, brought over to Mauritius to be indentured labourers. Magnificent production. It was in the well, I saw the production twice, in fact, and one time, the second time I saw it was in the Cutty Sark, which is an ancient or very old 18th century, I think, or something like that, ship that's been preserved on the south in Greenwich, in London, and you can go and have tours on the ship. And in the hold of the ship, the production was put on, so it was very evocative of the experience of indentured labourers who were probably brought over from India to Mauritius in ships, not unlike that. And so we were flying at that point, and it was a very successful production. Again, very deeply in the core of the mission of Border Crossings, giving voice to the experience of people who had been marginalised and dispossessed around that particular issue. You know, a cast of Mauritian as well as UK actors, of actual, you know, Mauritian actors. So exactly the mission of Border Crossings. And then literally a month later, there was the lockdown. And I remember the board meeting. We obviously, as a board, went straight over to, I had to go over to Zoom meetings, and that period, and then started the 2 years or so of the lockdown period, when in effect any face-to-face productions, like normal theatre productions, could not take place. And it was a big challenge, I think, to Border Crossings. The administration of it could continue because, as with most people, we discovered that online meetings were pretty effective, and so the administration of the charity could go on. But it was a very challenging period, but nonetheless, I think that artistically, Border Crossings responded to it very imaginatively and experimented with online productions and things of that sort. I think what it hit in particular was every 3 years, I think it was, Border Crossings had put on a festival, principally in London, of a festival of I don't know, usually about 10 different productions, not all theatre productions, different types of exhibitions and so on.
It's the Origins.
The Origins Festival, yes. And obviously there was due to be an Origins, the previous Origins Festival had happened in 2019. There was due to be one coming up, and that couldn't really take place in the same form. And so, and that, if you like, that festival had been one of the highlights of the Border Crossings artistic offering, and so that had to change, and it's not really got back to the way it was before. And Border Crossings was forced to, as I say, go into different forms of production, but I think it did that very well, and So we came through that, I think, pretty strongly, and came out of it stronger really than we had been before in terms of being a vibrant, successful company. There were also funding challenges during that period because as the sort of normal forms, or what had been the normal forms of artistic production, shut down for that period, there were fewer projects for which you could get funding, and that sort of impacted a bit. But again, we weathered that, and as I recall, we maintained quite a good financial strength during that period. And so since then, Border Crossings has really bounded back, as you could see, for example, in terms of the production, The Mouth of the Gods, which we discussed, which was performed in the beginning of 2025 and was a very strong, was a very successful production.
Great Experiment was actually the first Border Crossings project I worked on.
Right.
I, it was really, I'm trying to think. I really enjoyed it because I'd never done anything like that before. I'd worked in the film industry in physical distribution, so to do something that, and people would come up to you after the shows because they knew I was working for Border Crossings and at some of the events, and say how they were so grateful that people had talked about this and raised awareness about the issues.
Yeah, yeah.
It was
Yeah.
I'd never experienced anything like that before. It was really good to be part of something. It felt really special.
Yeah.
It was a great project, and the play was fantastic. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, yeah, it was. I suppose what it does, or what it did for me, and I don't know if this is a common experience, but certainly what it did for me is it puts a highlight on it's principally an artistic production. But it puts a highlight on an area that I didn't know much about, and so since then. I've looked a bit more into the issue. Obviously, with the slavery issue, there's been quite a lot of interest generally in it. A debunking, if you like, of what has been the is propaganda the word, but certainly the established view that has highlighted the UK's role in abolition of the slave trade, rather than the role that the UK had as one of the principal slave trading nations before that. And of course, where indentured servitude sits in this is that after the abolition of the slave trade, the economic entities that had relied on slavery, principally the sugar industry, needed new labour, so they developed this. That's what really developed indentured servitude, which by modern standards would be another form of slavery, really. And so again, the sort of exposure to the productions sort of gets you thinking, and certainly got me thinking on several occasions, and then you look a bit further into it, and it just generally develops your knowledge of history, I suppose. Another example of that for me was Mouth of the Gods, which put this spotlight on that early period of when the Spanish conquest of South America, and the way that the European culture clashed with the indigenous cultures. And again, I've looked a bit further into that, and found out more about what really was, even by the standards of, if you like, European standards of the time, was a pretty horrific experience for the indigenous peoples of Latin America. So yes. And that, I think, is, as I say, I mean, Border Crossings is about artistic production. It's about giving voice to the actual peoples. And one thing that I think picks Border Crossings out in terms of its productions is that Border Crossings has fantastic alliances with indigenous peoples from around the world. So, for example, with Mouth of the Gods, there was quite a heavy, if you like, indigenous Latin American involvement in the production, as well as UK actors and so on. Same with the Great Experiment. There were Mauritian actors there. So it's that sort of alliances, artistic alliances with people from around the world that I think is brilliant in the productions that Border Crossings has done. The gateway production for me to Border Crossings, the first one I saw, This Flesh Is Mine, was really, it was a sort of reworking of the Odyssey, the ancient Homeric text about Troy, into a more modern context of the experience of the Palestinians, for example, and the dispossession that they've had. And that was my gateway production. But again, that was a joint venture, is that the word? That's maybe a bit too commercial for it, but an artistic joint venture that involved a Palestinian, the Ashtar Theatre company in Ramallah in Palestine. So again, that just illustrates, I think, one of the strengths of Border Crossings is these artistic alliances that it makes. It's had, in my time there, there were these connections, these alliances with Indigenous Canadians, Indigenous Australians, all over really. I mean, it's absolutely fantastic. I think that working together, because it is about giving voice. I think giving voice, but principally artistic voice, to these different to the different marginalised, dispossessed peoples around the world, which, from the perspective of, if you like, the London, the UK audience, then principally it's an artistic experience to, as it were, consume these productions, to be in the audience of these productions, but it gets you thinking. It certainly got me thinking in areas that you don't really know that much about unless you've studied it.
So I had very little idea about indenture beforehand.
Yeah.
I ended up doing some work on the project for the educational resource pack for schools.
Yeah.
So I read up a lot of texts on the history, and I was really surprised because I didn't know. I was aware of it, and it was after the slave trade was abolished, and you hear about how it was great they abolished slavery, but you didn't hear what they brought in was slavery with a contract.
Yeah, exactly.
It's just
15 years of slavery, whatever, and then you're just, where are you after that sort of thing?
Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
So yeah, it got me to read up more on the history and find out more about it. I did another one. What's the other one called? The Columbian Exchange.
Yeah.
Which was about the transfer of foods. So how we end up with strawberries and avocados in Europe. That was really interesting. I did about 25 different plants.
Yeah.
So I found out how what they were called by the indigenous peoples, how they used them, and then how they came to Europe and how the Europeans used them.
Yeah.
So it was that was really interesting because I was aware of some of the things that came from South America.
Yeah.
But I hadn't really thought any more then okay, so we have these strawberries because they came from South America, and we have avocados.
Yeah.
But I hadn't really looked into the history of them, so it was really interesting to find out about the history of some of the foods that you just don't think about. You just buy it and eat it,
Yeah.
as it were.
Yeah.
So that was really cool.
And of course, it's quite fascinating as well, the transfers the other way. And so, for example, not so much in food terms, I think, but things like horses being taken to America that weren't there before. And of course, notoriously, the import of, inadvertent import, I think, of diseases, which perhaps was such as smallpox and so on. Actually, I think some of the diseases came the other way as well. And it was really that, I think, that was one of the main things in the smallpox that devastated cultures such as the Aztec culture or the Inca culture in Peru.
I've got the next one, the lockdown dialogues.
That one, I think, I wasn't so directly involved in the
Okay.
lockdown dialogues, but that was, I do recall, it was obviously one of the responses we had to the fact that the normal, if you like, forms of artistic production were clamped down on by the lockdown, by the pandemic, and the response that Border Crossings made to do it quite successfully, I think.
Next one, I've got the GAZA monologues.
Yeah, so this was, I say impromptu, but it was an immediate reaction to the horror of October the 7th and the response of the pretty horrific response of the Israeli government to that horrific event. It was an online production. It was essentially poetry readings, poetry written by Gazans. And it was a revival because it was a revival of a production that had been done, I think, in 2010 when there'd been a previous assault on Gaza as a result of actions of Hamas, and it was it was a series of actors who would read this poetry written by Gazans, and it was a response to that. I think it was November 2023, so a month or so after that whole horrible series of events had begun, and it was very moving. It was a very moving production. It was online, and I remember that it was everyone was extremely concerned about that situation, what was happening then, and I guess it was the impending genocide that was starting then, and there was very much a feeling of you wanted to, as an audience, as a member of the audience who was listening to this, you wanted to, I don't know, you wanted to help, but you couldn't really help more than just feel this sense of solidarity and sympathy with the people who were beginning to experience this horrific war against them. I guess, I remember also there was an attempt to disrupt the production as it was going through. I don't know the technical terms for it, but there was sort of somebody trying to interfere with the Zoom production of it, and there was some crackly sounds coming and strange voices coming in the middle of it. But the performance continued. But that sort of created, I think, a greater sense of solidarity that you realise that somebody had wanted to disrupt the performance in that way. It made you realise how important, if you like, those type of things were. But again, you know, it's the classic mission of, if that's the right word, the mission of Border Crossings to give voice to the dispossessed and the marginalised, principally artistically. It was actual poetry that had been written by Gazans when they experienced a similar assault on them back in 2010, I think it was. And so that was, again, it was a very moving experience to particularly moving, I think, because it was taking place just as this whole series of events was panning out. And I mean, if you look now, when is it, 3 years on, to see how things have developed, not just for Gaza, but in the wider Middle East, it's, I don't know, I think Border Crossings was, it was a great production to have been part of in that way.
And it's still ongoing, so it's quite relevant even now.
Yeah, it's now taken a new, well, I mean, I don't think from what you read in the news that the experience of the Gazans has, I think the horror against them has lessened a bit, but it's still going on. And now it's taken on a much wider dimension of the violence and the war now, not just against Iran, but against other countries, the Gulf countries, and even Israel itself is receiving bombs. And so it's I don't know, it's a bad time, I think.
And it's going to have far-reaching implications for the rest of the world.
Yeah.
It's
yes.
And now I saw on the internet that they're calling up soldiers to send the Americans, calling up soldiers to send like 2,000 to start with.
Yeah.
It's just going to escalate, and it's not going. I don't know how to resolve this at all. I really don't know what they're going to do to solve it.
No, it's a lot of. I suppose watching it happen, you see how interconnected everything is, and how if you disrupt one aspect of it, then how it creates so many other dependencies that then make things instantaneously worse. And of course, you know, it's as well as the experience of the people in the region, of all of the peoples in the region. You know, it's having onwards impacts on international financial stability, economic stability, in ways that I won't say weren't predictable, but because I think they probably were. But nonetheless, you know, the impact's there now, and so it is a very, it's difficult to see how it can be resolved. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, fertilizers or ingredients for fertilizers flow out from there, and food goes in.
Yeah.
If that fertilizer ingredients doesn't get out to the wider world by April, that's going to impact on everyone's food.
Yes.
The helium that comes out from there is used in the manufacturing of chips. So that's going to have implications for everything we plug in these days.
Yeah.
And then the oil prices are going to go up everywhere. Petrol's going to go up everywhere. Heating, electricity, because it's tied to the price of gas because reasons.
Yeah.
It's going to impact not just the people living there, it's going to impact everyone. And I can't see why. I can't see a way out of this, because it's just it's going to be awful for the people that are living there. And I just don't see how they're going to resolve it in time before it gets, well, it's just going to get more and more out. I don't know.
Yeah, It's not a good.
The
It's
sabre
not a good,
rattling by Trump is not going to make things any better. And then
yeah,
there's the accusations of market manipulation.
of course.
It's all interconnected, and I just don't see how they couldn't have foreseen all these things happening before they decided, oh yeah, let's get involved.
Yeah, and I think there were, as I say, I think a lot of it was foreseeable. Um, but yeah, it's not a good situation.
No, no, it must be awful for everyone living there, having to deal with it on a daily basis. And
I think that's right. I mean,
we're insulated from the impacts on the ground.
yeah,
We're on the ripples of it.
that's right. And you know, I mean, we can talk about the economic effects and so on, but yeah, I mean, the people who are really suffering are the people there who live there in different countries all over that region who are, you know, imagine what it must be like living in a skyscraper in Dubai or somewhere, or as well as, you know, the horrible incident of a school in Iran that was primary school that was bombed. You know, people all over that region, Israel, Gaza, West Bank, Iran, Gulf states, Saudi Arabia, all of them. They're the ones who are getting the brunt of this, I think. Yeah.
Sorry, went on a bit of a tangent there.
Yeah, it's I can't say I'm not. I'm always optimistic about things, and I do believe there will be a resolution. I don't know how it will come about. But I do know that well, you can see it behind the scenes. There are politicians and so on from different countries that are working hard to try to find a way to resolve it. Yeah, and let's hope that. I think it's in everyone's interests that it is resolved. Yeah,
Definitely. I know we're jumping around a little bit with through the projects. Were there any challenges involved with Brexit?
yeah. There was, and I think that the response of Border Crossings to the Brexit situation was quite clever. It Brexit was a big challenge, principally because the European Commission had been quite a good source of funds for artistic projects for border crossings, and obviously with and I mean I joined the board in that long period in 2019, which was that long period after we knew that Brexit was going to happen, or it's very likely it was going to happen, but we didn't know precisely when it would happen and the type of exit we would have. But I think it was pretty, you know, I think we sort of predicted that it was likely that UK-based entities would lose access to the source of European Commission funds, which had been quite a good source of funds for the artistic productions of border crossings over the years. So in terms of funding, I mean, really, Border Crossings has good relationships with UK funders such as the Arts Council, but not just UK funders, not just public UK funders, but also sort of charitable entities that are quite an important source of funds. But also the EU source of funds was quite important as well. And Border Crossings' response to this was to set up a sister organisation in Ireland, the Irish Border Crossings Company, which is a separate company with its own artistic production, and that company could continue to tap into EC sources of funding. And so what came out of it for Border Crossings was that its mission expanded, if you like, to include a new company in Ireland, which has itself really started to find its feet and started to produce its own really good productions. Not just, I mean, obviously the Irish experience of dispossession and marginalisation in the past was quite a powerful one. But not just that, you know, the normal Border Crossings pattern of alliances with other, if you like, dispossessed and marginalised people around the world has developed for them as well. And so, so if you like, in terms of the wider mission, that was the approach that Border Crossings took to Brexit, which is, I think, proved to be quite successful.
Were there many legal issues with setting up?
Well, it's a separate company. It's a separate entity with its own priorities and its own focus.
Sort of have its own trustees.
It's a sister organisation with, and there obviously are. I mean, this had, I should say that the setting up of this company had happened before I joined the board, and so I saw it as it developed, as it started going and developed. I think the setup had happened maybe a year or so before I joined the board, or it had just happened. And so it was really the period I saw was when the Irish company was getting going and starting to get funding and putting on its own productions. And so the legal issues were really around my role on the board couldn't be to give a view on Irish dimensions. Sometimes we'd have joint board meetings with the two companies, and I couldn't really give a view on Irish law issues. That was done separately. But yeah, the setup of the company involved the use of lawyers in Ireland to set up the charity, to make the charitable registration with the Irish Charity Commission. There are lots of similarities between UK and Irish law, but there are also differences. And in fact, the regulation, the charitable regulation in Ireland is, I think, probably it's a slightly more intrusive type of regulation of charities. But really, I'm not aware there have been issues coming out of the Irish company. They operate independently, separately, and so yeah, there were legal issues around that, but they were navigated quite successfully, I think.
The last point I've got is which we've touched on, was the Origins project. So.
So just after I joined the board, which was March 2019, was, as it happens, one of the Origins festivals that summer, and I really, at a personal level, gorged on that. I went to see lots of things in that Origins festival. As it turned out, it was the last Origins festival in that old format of principally being about productions. You go, face-to-face productions. This was just before the pandemic obviously hit the next year. And again, that was the range of stuff that was on offer in that production was amazing. I mean, there were films. I remember seeing a Canadian film about the experience of an Indigenous Canadian who had been taken away from his family and put into an institution and been which was it was a common thing done in Canada. It was also, I think, done in Australia to Indigenous peoples. It was pretty scandalous, and there's still, and it was happening fairly recently. I think this practice was only fairly recently, by which I mean, I think 50s or 60s, 70s, something like that, it finally stopped. So there was that. There was a festival of a community participation festival in, I think it was Ladbroke Grove. I can't remember the name of it now, but you could go and there would be people dancing and singing, performers who were doing that. But the idea was that members of the community could come and join in. And so the range of stuff really was quite, the effort that had gone into producing that festival, not just the volume of stuff that was going on, but the different types of stuff. And there was, I remember going to a performance called Moxo, which was a production in the South Bank. It took place in the South Bank, and that's another aspect I'll touch on of Border Crossings that is really impressive. But there was obviously a relationship with the South Bank, and so this theatre performance was put on in the South Bank called Moxo. It was again, I think it was principally indigenous Latin American performers who put that production on. It was a journey down the Amazon. The production was about a journey down the Amazon in search of Moxo, the legendary shaman of there. And so, again, one of the sort of core missions, if you like, or the core mission of Border Crossings, giving voice to indigenous experiences and indigenous legends in this case, and that was magnificent. So it was the sheer variety of stuff that really struck me, just as a new, if you like, a new member of the board then. And so that was, and just from the perspective of somebody who, as it were, was a consumer of art, just wanting to go and participate in these artistic experiences as a member of the audience, it was the variety of it was quite staggering, really. All of this taking place over, I don't know, a month or so, 3 or 4 weeks in London, different places in London, different venues. And one of the things that I think is one of the strengths of another of the strengths of Border Crossings is that it has great connections with institutions, within artistic institutions, principally within London. So, for example, I mentioned the production of the South Bank. At the moment, a very good relationship has developed with Hoxton Hall in Hoxton, which is where Mouth of the Gods was produced, or rather where Mouth of the Gods was put on. And also there's been quite a good relationship over the years with the British Museum as well. All, important artistic and British Museum's case, historical institutions in London in particular, and they all seem to value the connection with Border Crossings, and Border Crossings works with them, or has worked with them at different times to enhance its own offerings, its own productions in London. So it's been, and that again, I think, is one of the strengths that Border Crossings has had.
So the last one I wanted to ask about was the impact of your work with Border Crossings and on yourself and on the wider world.
So to start with myself, not because I'm more important than the wider world, but because you mentioned it first. So I think I touched on it earlier. What Border Crossings has done for me is expose me to different perspectives, principally from, indigenous peoples around the world, and really is not just one particular part of the rest of the world, but it's all over. I mentioned, relationships with Mauritius, with Palestinians, with Indigenous Canadians, with Indigenous Australians, First Peoples from all over really, and it exposes you to their voice, their perspective in an artistic fashion, and I think the impact it's had on me is it then gets me thinking, and usually you look a bit more into the issue, find out the history of it, whatever, and that just, I think, has enhanced my perspective on areas that I knew little about before. And it's sort of, and that I think has been the principal effect on me. I think the impact on the wider world is, I think it's really important. I think when art speaks, when art puts forward a view, when you see something, when you hear voices in artistic format, it doesn't lead to immediate change in the world, but it's like a slow burning thing. It just sits there and it gets people thinking, and I believe that it's this sort of slow burn thing. I think it takes time, but I do believe that it's difficult to say this at the moment because of so much bad that's happening in the world, but it's also easy to overlook, I think, the good things that are happening. And I think that what Border Crossings does in terms of the wider world is that it gets people thinking in a small way, and that eventually this will change the overall narrative. And I think that art is therefore in the forefront of that change. And when the art speaks, when the art is put forward, it takes a while, but eventually there's a very good chance, I think, that it will lead to wider impacts and I think you can see this in history, seminal artistic works in the past. For example, the response of a lot of artists in the McCarthyist period in America was, since the McCarthyist attack was on, among others, artists in Hollywood. You see some films that were produced as a sort of indirect response to that, or direct response, but with not necessarily with quite subtle messages. And then eventually the whole climate changed, and I think that's what Border Crossings is doing, and I think that will be its impact on the wider world.